All right, good afternoon, everyone. I didn't need a call and response, I just wanted it quiet. If you're at the door, come on in, grab an empty seat. If there are no more empty seats around the tables, grab a seat from the front row and pull it up to a table. This is a new and different format for public programs at the Harvard Graduate School of Design that is very participatory. So please come on in and engage. And my team around and others, if you see students looking for chairs and we can help pull chairs up to tables, please do. Hey, Rodrigo, can you grab my bag and pull it off? Okay, great. So my name is Professor Tony Griffin. I'm a professor of practice at Harvard Graduate School of Design. And for those in the room and those listening via the broadcast, let me welcome you to the 4th volume of Mayors Imagining the Just City. This public program culminates a program that was launched in 2020 in the height of COVID with our partners, the Mayor's Institute of City Design, and the National Endowment of Arts, and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who had resources to provide to mayors during that time remotely. These are institutions that have, for the last 40, 50 years, helped to advance the awareness, appreciation, and advocacy by mayors for good design in their cities. And during COVID and civil unrest around George Floyd and other fires that were brewing during that time, they saw fit to continue to provide resources to cities because, as you can imagine, and as you live through, public space, the public realm, the built environment was still very much a part of what needed to be solved for and made available and comfortable for citizens as they were going through those times. So by invitation, we were invited to help them think about how to support mayors in that work. And that summer, we created a curriculum and launched the first of our City Mayoral Fellowship programs, which is run through a research lab that I created about a decade ago called the Just City Lab, which asks this question: how can design help to facilitate better just cities? And does it? So who do we need to involve to do that? So I've been very honored to shepherd 4 classes of mayors through this program over the last 4 years, totaling upwards of almost 30 mayors from across the country. This cohort of 7 mayors represents our broadest diversity geographically, by city size, by race, ethnicity, sexuality, age, gender, etc. So I'm very excited to have them all here today. I'm also excited, and you'll hear about this a little bit later, that we've created this closing format with the mayors to be in direct conversation with, I think, one of the heartbeats of the GSD community, which is the student-led organizations. There's so many organizations here that are so deeply active and activated around various issues that are affecting the world, that are affecting their discipline, that are affecting them as humans, and they're affecting the community of the school, both students, faculty, and staff. So I'm really delighted that they will be leading conversations with the mayors this afternoon in 2 panels and pushing forward the issues that are a part of their study, a part of their research, and a part of what will be their practice. So mayors, staff in the room, and anybody listening, these are people for hire in the future, and we hope that you're making great connections. After our panels, people are invited to sit at small tables with mayors and staffs and continue those conversations in a more intimate setting so that students, you are actually building your network, and that mayors, we are actually providing you with access to extraordinary talent. So before we get into the program, a couple of folks would like to welcome you all in the room and listening online. First, I'd like to bring up our Dean, Dean Sarah Whiting.
Thank you, Tony. So this is sort of the easiest part of my job is doing this little introduction, which is, okay, wow. I won't tell you what she told me. No, seriously, this is really one of the best parts of my job because, frankly, this program has taken off thanks to Tony and the partnership with Trinity and now with Ben. This is sort of one of these things where, as a dean, you dream that something good will happen and it will take off and it will foster itself and it will produce great results. Just as you all, as mayors, hope that these things happen in your cities. And you know, as mayors, and I'm sort of mayor of the GSD, that doesn't always happen that way. And this has. I mean, this is, I think, just a brilliant program, and it really is thanks to Tony and Trinity, primarily. Both of you have really done an amazing job. So before anything, I just want to say thank you. So the other reason why I'm very fond of this program is, you all come here, you spend time at the school and online in this class. You create a cohort, a fairly raucous cohort, I have to add, with this group in particular. I was having a meeting with a group of donors in one room, and you all were in the next room. And I have to note that your room was more lively than my room, and I was a little envious. But that, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think that this class that you're taking has very direct parallels with what we're doing in the school. So we have our classes, the studios that look at problems in the world and try and solve them, are cohorts that also form that tight-knit, that cross across disciplines, that understand problems from different perspectives. And if you look at the exhibit that's beginning to go up out on the walls right now, that's showing a glimpse of all the classes in the school that are happening right now and coming to an end. Our final reviews start on Tuesday or Wednesday. Is it Tuesday? So it's really, this is the very end of the semester. There's quite a frenzy upstairs in the building, but that's what you've been experiencing. And even if we have the luxury of not having real constituents who are knocking on our doors or real economies, we're trying in the school to address problems in much of the way that you are. And so I think that this possibility for seeing how cities are tackling different ideas and trying to make the public realm more just is incredibly relevant. And the fact that you're working on these problems is very important to me. And seeing the problems that you're tackling, to me, has been very moving and important. I joke that I'm the mayor of the GSD. I have a much different position. I really think you all have the hardest jobs in this country. It is one of the most important government jobs because you're really at the local level dealing with problems that affect us every day. And I want to take this moment to just thank you for the service that you do in tackling what I think is an incredibly powerful and incredibly impactful job. And so thank you, and I'm very glad that now you have a glimpse as to the importance of why design can actually make a big difference to your cities and to your worlds. So thank you very much. I look forward to this afternoon.
And I would say, Sarah, because I think that this is also the first class that has a robust representation from strong mayor structures, which means the mayor governs and has a staff that represents, that includes the city manager and all the different departments, versus a weak mayor structure where there's a mayor who oversees policy and a city manager who actually runs the operation. So we have mayors that represent both of those dynamics. So I think GSD would be in a weak mayor structure where we have the mayor and then these chief of staff, but you know, there is policy and there's operations, and well, anyway, there's a really interesting diagram that could emerge from that analogy, so we might continue to work on that. Let me next bring up my partner in crime, Trinity Simons-Wagner, who has been a co-conspirator with me for a number of years, and it's been an honor and a privilege, and so thankful that the call came to me to help you figure some stuff out during a time where figuring stuff out was like an everyday thing. So let me invite Trinity Simons-Wagner, Director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design.
Thanks, Tony. So first, I guess maybe technically weak mayors, but we like to say council manager form of government. Yes, we don't say part-time mayors because there's no such thing as part-time, no matter how compensated you are. So I am Trinity Simons-Wagner, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. The Mayor's Institute is a leadership initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. It's in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors. Bring greetings from both of those organizations. You'll hear from a colleague at the NEA in just a few minutes. But through a variety of programs and resources, we equip mayors to be the chief urban designers of their cities. Our program has been going strong since 1986. In that time, we've worked with over 1,200 mayors, over 700 design and development professionals, and the City Mayoral Fellowship is one of our newest programs and one that we are exceptionally proud of. So I just want to maybe a little plug to the students in the room about, maybe that are thinking about your futures, about local government. And we are obviously big fans of mayors and the work that is happening in cities across the country right now. To pull from a few cliches maybe that, city government is the one that is closest to the people, that the kind of partisan politics that we see at the national and state level, for the most part, haven't seeped into local politics. You can still get stuff done, and you'll hear today from mayors who are getting stuff done. We have a joke that is very much a cliche in mayor world, that there's no Democrat or Republican way to fill a pothole. You're held accountable by your residents, and you have to get things done. But mayors are not working parochially either. To borrow another cliche, they're thinking globally and acting locally. So, as you are thinking about what is happening in your careers next, don't overlook local government in the United States. I would also say I've been executive director for about 12 years, and we have seen this move from mayors and thinking about themselves as maybe a chief decision maker to a chief collaborator. You're going to see a lot of that on display too, I think, in these conversations. But we also know that urban design cities are at their best when voices that are on the ground doing the work are uplifted and amplified, and these mayors are doing exactly that in their work. So we can't wait for you to get to know them a little bit better. But first, we're going to hear a few words from my colleague, Ben Stone, the Director of Design and Creative Placemaking at the National Endowment for the Arts.
Thank you, Trinity, and hi, everybody. Hello, folks in the room. Hello, folks at home. Hello, folks at home in their home offices and their offices at work. It's great to be here with you all. It's really exciting to be back here at the GSD during this super busy, exciting time of the semester. I'm really glad to not have reviews on my calendar coming up so soon, or finals or anything of that matter. So I'm Ben Stone, Director of Design and Creative Placemaking with the National Endowment for the Arts. I bring you greetings from our chair, Maria Rosario Jackson, who is the first ever planner to be in this role. I myself am also trained as a planner, so it's great to be here with all of you, planners and designers. And yes, design has a home at the National Endowment for the Arts. So we are, as our name doesn't necessarily literally imply, we are the federal government's arts agency. We are the largest funder of the arts in the United States, created by an act of Congress back in 1965. So when I came here just, 2 days ago, now it seems like quite a while, we all got together to start. Tony, who is so great at running facilitation and interactive activities, asked us all what we were most looking forward to during our time together. And I representing the federal government, slightly more removed from the folks who are filling potholes and getting stuff done on a day-to-day basis, said that I was really looking forward to being a sponge and being inspired by all of you mayors and the resource team members who are working really on the ground. It really helps me and my team do our work better when we hear from those of you on the ground working with our funding, doing the projects and getting stuff done. So thank you to all the mayors and the staff who participated for making that come true over the last few days. I really quickly want to thank Dean Whiting and the GSD for hosting us over the last few days. Again, it's great to be back here in this space. The MICD team, Grace, Ethan, and Trinity, all the students we had working with us, all the staff that traveled in, and the mayors, of course, and the resource team members who joined us as well. Back when this program was kicked off 4 years ago now, I guess it was, I was at another organization before joining the NEA, and I remember, like probably many of you, looking around in 2020 trying to figure out how to pivot and what to do in the shadow of the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, and trying to figure out what could be relevant and useful. And I use this as an example, the Just City Mayoral Fellowship of what my former organization should do, and then I joined another organization and held it up as an example of what that organization should do. And for many reasons, it didn't actually happen. This is not an easy thing to put together on the fly, and I'm so grateful that I'm now able to swoop in and join the team and learn from all of you and participate in the way that I was able to. So thank you again all for being here and for your participation over the last few days. Looking forward to the conversations today. Thanks.
All right, let's get to the conversation. So we're going to do 2 30-ish rounds of conversations facilitated by your colleagues. So if you are in the trays and you want to be a part of the conversation in an intimate way, there's still time for you to come down. There's still a seat at the table. Let's start with our first panel, which will be the Mayor of San Rafael, California, Mayor Kate Collin, and as I call your name, please come up. Mayors will grab a seat in the middle, and the Mayor of Lima, Ohio, Mayor Sharita Smith. And a conversation with these 2 mayors will be conducted by Alejandra Pardini Osorio, representing Latin GSD. Please come up, Alejandra. And Hannah Wong from Design Able. Let's give them a round of applause. And if I can ask a member of my team to give me a 5-minute heads up when we're into the 30 minutes. Great. Everybody pour yourself some water. So I'm just here to help guide conversation. So I'm going to even pull myself away so you can focus more on these 4 amazing people. I'm first going to turn the conversation over to Hannah Wong from Design Able, who will introduce herself and tell you a little bit about the organization before she lobs her first question. Hannah.
Okay, hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I use she, her pronouns. I am originally from San Francisco, and I am a Master of Architecture student here. I'm the first legally blind student to be admitted to the GSD, and when I matriculated in 2020, me and my co-founder Eric Larson founded Designable, which is a student organization that focuses on disability and dismantling ableism through education. So we primarily hold lectures and workshops on educating designers about how not only to provide accessible spaces, but also what inclusivity really means in design and to create a sense of belonging. So my first question has to do kind of with a recent law that was passed in California. So in March, California passed Proposition 1, which allows the government to order those in crisis, particularly those who are mentally ill and houseless, to be involuntarily institutionalized. While the government argues that the increases in their ability to help those who need it most, it also strips disabled people of their dignity and civil rights. How can we provide government assistance to disabled people who are often marginalized by the system, while still promoting their rights to freedom and without diminishing their abilities to make choices for themselves?
So we might start with Mayor Kate from California, and if Mayor Smith, you have anything to add, we can pivot to you as well.
Thank you, Hannah. And it's wonderful to be here and be asking these hard questions. And I've really enjoyed the conversation over the past 10 weeks, 11 weeks, of how do we introduce design into government policies and the problems we're trying to solve. So when you're asking that question, what is the problem we're trying to solve, is where I start. So I'm going to answer both parts. And as designers, that's what you're trying to figure out. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the process? You're bringing your systems thinking. You're bringing your creative thinking. Because what I found is maybe the way it's been done hasn't been as effective, and it hasn't been as inclusive, and it hasn't been centering all of the voices. And we're at an evolution point. And that's one reason I love this role, even if there are some spicy parts to it. It's because we are trying to reimagine how we do engage in these answers. So when I think about how can designers provide support, it's one, showing up in the spaces and having the conversation and saying, hey, you might have not thought of it this way. And probably government agencies, not probably, for sure, governments are a little slow to evolve. The good news is we have people in the right places that are trying to make that evolution. And I think it's being in partnership and sometimes being in disagreement, and saying, where are we missing each other? Where are we not hearing each other? And where do we just flat out disagree? I could speak for a very long time around the unhoused population in California. We have one of the largest populations in the nation. And being that this is not a symposium on supporting the unhoused, I'll simply say what we've been doing hasn't been good enough, and that we need to do things differently. When I walk down a street and when I walk down my main street and I see folks there, I take that as a failure, and I own that, and I ask my community members to own that too. It's not one institution, it's all of us not figuring out how to come together and have that solution to support getting people from our streets into permanent supportive housing.
And I'd like to even offer up, and this would be, I think it's going to be a good segue to Alejandra and Latin GSD. We started this program during COVID where we had to be very tactical, very innovative, thinking very much out the box, pushing the limits of existing regulation and policy because the need required that for a very unusual situation. And I know that designers leaned in with mayors and other folks to try to figure out things to do in the public realm for different populations. So I wonder if you can even think about it, and I'll ask Mayor Smith to think about this if she'd like. Was there a way in which you used designers even during that time, which was, again, trying to do something that wasn't traditionally done, and maybe the homeless population was a part of it, maybe it was just providing people access, an open space, but also now is relating to the influx of migrants that your cities are having too. Are there any ways that you've tried to adapt through a design thinking lens? And you can think about design. And so like maybe Mayor Smith to answer that, and then I'm going to pivot to Alejandra, and you guys can keep the conversation flowing from there.
So connected to Hannah's question, and thank you for that very insightful question, because it's actually a real world example of something that's happening in my city. And so from a design perspective, particularly around housing, we've been working with our local mental health recovery service board to construct housing that includes supportive services. And really what that does is it allows individuals that are facing homelessness or are housing insecure to be able to live in dignity, because regardless of our differences, abilities, disabilities, there's something about being human that you want to hold on to your dignity. And so again, it's about how do you design a space where individuals can live in housing that is quality housing, that is affordable housing. Also something that I've learned over the course of these 10 weeks, housing that is also attractive as well. Affordable does not mean that it's not attractive, but also how can you leverage, particularly as a leader of your city, your power to convene as a mayor to bring in organizations to bring supportive services that individuals need right where they live as well.
So I'm going to pivot to Alejandra, allow her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about Latin GSD, and ask the next question.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Alejandra Pardini. I am currently a first-year Master of Design Studies here in the public's realm. I come from Lima, Peru, and my interest is in... yeah, it's
Lima.
Yeah, from I will try to say Lima, because in the city, from Lima, Peru, and my interest lies in the topics of governance and the intersection with design about vulnerable populations, especially. I'm a member of the Latin GSD student organization, where we, as the name says, we focus on discussions, research about the diaspora and the community of Latin American cities here in the United States, and that's also where my questions are leading in, so I'm going to start with the first one, if that's okay. Yes. Okay. In many cities, there is a socioeconomic division that segregates different populations, with migrants often finding themselves among marginalized groups. So my question is, considering these, what strategies would you propose for integrating migrants and refugees into the city's social fabric while preserving their cultural identities and ensuring their full inclusion in public life?
You're looking at me. Again, another timely question. And so probably since the 1800s, when our city was founded, we've had less than 1% immigrant population. And most recently, we've seen an influx of immigrants from Haiti. And so it is something that as a Midwestern, non-coastal city, we've never really had to even face. Immigration issue, individuals coming into our community from other countries. And so one of the things that we're doing, again, and this is about collaboration and working to bring all agencies together, is figuring out, number one, what resources are needed from populations that are arriving. But one of the things that we learned is that we can't sit at the table and try to figure that out without including the community, right? And so just engaging with that community to find out, you know, what those needs are. And then this goes even back to the whole humanity thing. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the same for everybody, right? And so looking at that and seeing what we can do to be a welcoming community, but also educating the legacy citizens about being more inclusive, but also trying to dispel some of the myths that we have about different people from other countries.
Just really quickly, would that require you and your staff going to where migrants were encamping? Were there organizations that you worked with to help build a bridge to connecting with those organizations? Can you just say a little bit?
Yes, in our community that has been the churches, okay. And most interesting enough, our Habitat for Humanity Restore. So just finding where individuals are going in the community and going to those places.
So it's not always government staff doing it, but government finding intermediaries and organizations that are perhaps closer to the ground and figuring out ways to bridge the gap between resources you have and populations.
And one of the things that I've learned just really quickly is that is government most of the times is not the best organization to go. Okay. Like, we can provide the resources, but those community organizations are better equipped to make those connections.
Did you want to respond as well?
Yeah, so the two key things I was going to say has already been said. I mean, that's a great question, but the part I want to double down on is that this is evolving. So historically, government would come in and say, okay, we have folks in just context. So San Rafael, back in the 70s, we had a large influx of Vietnamese Americans that came in from Vietnam. And most recently, we have a Latinx population. I use that term, but really the better term is Guatemalans, Hondurans, Mexicans, El Salvador. Like, it's a full, rich tapestry of people who have come to San Rafael. And so historically, government would say, okay, this is what you need. This is how we're going to gather. And it's been really exciting to be at this moment of evolution, of centering the human voice, and it's centering that lived experience. Was exactly what Mayor Smith has said, and then really repeating what Professor Tony said, is that you have to have those trusted messengers. I still can't walk, I mean, I can now, I've built the relationship, but to walk into a space co-sponsoring those spaces, co-creating these spaces, co-creating the conversations, because government does have a role, and I wouldn't put that on a nonprofit to represent the government, but we can be there together, and we've been doing that in San Rafael. We still have a long way to go, and we're learning. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we have to redo it because we didn't land the way we wanted to, but that's how we really start to build that trust. And the last thing I'll say is one access point in San Rafael has been through culture, so that has been through both art and celebration. So the Day of the Dead celebration we have in San Rafael is the best in Northern California. Just putting that out there. If you're visiting at that time of year.
Yeah. So just based on your answers, I'm going to ask Alejandra to think about questions 3 and 4, because these are questions where you're wanting to ask the mayors about specific strategies or tactics that they've used based on their answers. Do you want to take one of those questions and ask it now?
Yes, I would say I would focus on this framework to foster collaboration. What would government-led agencies, organizations, private sector stakeholders to promote inclusive urban development that respects and integrates the cultural heritage? So I'm thinking and the experience of these migrant communities. We know we're not only talking Latin America. You also told me a little bit that there were Asian community also coming to your cities. So what would the framework look like, an institutionalized framework?
Yeah. And especially if you've had an example where that's starting to emerge, it'd be great to hear.
So we don't have an example yet. This is a very fresh issue, like a 2024 issue for our community. But just going back on history and hearing what Mayor Kate said, you know, early in our history of our community, it was a community of immigrants, German, Irish American. And so in our community, we have an Irish Day parade every year, one of the most attended parades that we have in our city that people look forward to. Restaurants shut down. I mean, it's a national holiday in Lima, Ohio. And so just those things, including culture, food, music, it's always a healing thing when you come from an arts perspective. And I also, you know, I noticed on social media while I was here that there's going to be a festival in our community where someone is planning introducing individuals to Haitian food. And so I'll let you know how it goes.
Thank you. And I'll add on to that. So we have been deep in this conversation trying to figure out what the framework looks like. And I think the ability to be flexible, and again, when I go back to that government is evolving, historically government isn't super flexible, but I'll share an example. So transit is really important. We found our immigrant community is highly transit dependent. And so the transit agencies, hats off to them, are trying to ensure that folks have access to transit and the right type of transit. So they go out, meet with trusted messengers, they're co-creating the agenda, they're doing all the right things. They get the folks in the room and they start talking, and the community says, okay, that's great, I want to talk about bus routes, I'll get there. But what we really want to talk about is lighting. We really want to talk about crosswalks. We really want to talk about pedestrian safety. And that was just such an aha moment, because here, a perfect example of government coming in saying, this is what we're going to be doing today. And so I think when the agency walked out of there, they brought in the city, we brought in other partners who could help facilitate that conversation. But it just really underscores that you have to meet people where they are. And then the other key part is, so those needs were expressed. So it was incumbent upon the city. We brought in the stakeholders. We have the relationships. We brought in Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, our electric company. We brought them in, and we succeeded in improving the lighting, right? So if someone came in, said their need, this is what I need to have a more inclusive community, so we can start to build trust. We haven't even talked about trust. It's a whole other symposium. I mean, trust is a big, big thing. It's important to have good policy, and that was really important. So now we have lighting. We're not totally done with the project, but it's there, and we have the crosswalks. So now we have actually built this relationship, built trust, and we can start building out that framework.
Trust is another symposium, but we're going to talk about it right now, because I think Hannah has a couple of questions that tie into some of your responses, which is, so you've talked about trust. Mayor Smith, you talked about incoming residents and legacy residents. And even within that, going back to something Alejandra mentioned, which was this, the notion of identity, which different identities exist in both incoming residents and legacy residents. And so all of these things could create potential conflicts, right? Conflicting needs, conflicting identities, conflicting demands, desires, et cetera, for which trust, I imagine, has to be a component of the solution. So I'm going to turn it back to Hannah, who I know has some questions within this realm, and ask her to ask her next question.
Yes. So one of the things that policymakers and designers have in common is that they have to advocate for conflicting needs. So politicians often represent diverse constituencies, and designers, especially those with disabilities, need to account for conflicting access needs. So how do you handle this discrepancy, and what can we learn from each other?
Yep, go for it.
Conflict, trust. No, you build trust with the, no. So really quick example. So I know an individual that is, he's legally blind, but completely independent. And he had been, prior to me coming into the administration, he had been talking with the previous administration and the public works director about putting audible crosswalks at particularly our most busy streets. And really, you know, wasn't getting anywhere. And you talked about earlier, Mayor Kate, about how cities are hard to change and it takes us a while to change. And so, you know, I had been saying to the Public Works Director, you know, this individual's calling, he wants to sit down with you, so on and so forth. And so what I did was I just set up a meeting between myself, the Public Works Director, and the individual, and gave the individual the space and the ability to advocate for himself and what he needs, and not just him, but there's a whole community of individuals. And so I will say that we now have a policy that whenever we do our crosswalks, they do include the audible traffic that is needed for individuals. And so just using that as an example, just sometimes, you know, opening up the door for people to come in and be able to advocate for themselves for what they need helps build trust.
This is why mayors are so dope. Call a meeting, get it done. I mean, I think that's great. That's why I think you guys are the best elected office ever. Mayor Kate, did you want to respond to that question also?
No, I would love to answer that question. And it's one of those things that sounds easy when I say it, and you hear it all the time, but to really do it, and that is to listen. You have to listen. And again, government has to step back to make space. And that example you gave was beautiful. You heard the need and you said, hey, I'm just gonna come, set this meeting and I'm gonna listen. And as designers, you have to have that ability to listen. And we all have our preconceived ideas, right? That's just who we are as humans. We're gonna have our biases, we're gonna have our expertise, we're gonna have all of that. I'm not saying to leave that at the door. I'm saying to listen and then to think about how can I incorporate, you know, the skill set that I'm bringing with what I'm hearing. And Hannah, it's interesting in the phrasing of the question. I was thinking about this because you specifically said conflicting needs. And I'm going to ponder that more, but my initial reaction is, are they all that conflicting? You said we had a diverse mayor cohort. So I'm the oldest mayor here, just saying. And so as I age, things that might have seen, oh, you know, that's not relevant to me, that's actually not the case. And so maybe the argument and maybe the reframing is to, instead of saying conflicting needs, saying there's a wide part of our population, and maybe all of us, that can benefit from whatever this design, and you gave a great example about the audible signals. And so I think as we frame questions, so maybe as opposed, or in addition to saying a conflicting need, where do our needs intersect? And let's get busy around that intersection and start building that trust and making that change there.
I love that response because it also brings into the conversation the importance of language, which anybody who's been in a class with me knows I find incredibly important, the precision of language. And so as mayors, how you think about changing the narrative of what people are talking about to help to build and break down conflicting conversations or the perceptions of conflicting needs, I think is important. And it also reminds me of folks that I know that work in the broad equity space. always say, you know, the framing of an equity proposition, the fear of it, the reluctance to even use the language of it, is based on the perception that to pursue equitable outcomes requires someone giving up something to get something, right? We've all heard that, right? But let's just use the example of the audible crosswalk. And maybe there was a conflicting point of view around why we should do that. Okay, you facilitated this engagement, implementation happens, very dope, the things are installed, and now all of a sudden, lots of people are benefiting from that. So often an equitable outcome benefits more than just who it was intended to than not. So I think we have to stop thinking that this is a either or a winner or loser proposition, that if you achieve many of the equitable outcomes that we're talking about, everyone tends to benefit. Just think about audible crosswalks and little kids. Yeah. You know, just there's a whole host of beneficiaries that may have started with one group, but actually end up resonating. I think we have time for each of our facilitators to ask one additional question. So I'm going to ask you each to both ask your additional question, pick whatever one you want, and then we'll have each mayor respond to one of those questions before we end this fantastic panel. So Alejandra or Hannah, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to deviate a little bit from these questions.
You can even ask a question based on what you've heard.
Yeah, exactly. When we talked about trust, you know, I was thinking about the accountability of the governance and the sometimes extractive nature of, you know, asking the population to tell you their needs, to tell you what they need, to advocate for themselves in order to change things, because there's like, I'm coming from Latin America, for example, the grassroots organizations take a lot of this burden, if you can call it that. Yep. So I'm thinking about what does the government can implement to not be so extractive of the accountability, or what do they give back in terms, because also when you start asking a lot of questions all the time and then do not solve them, people get tired of answering. So I'm wondering about your experience within that.
That's a complicated question, so I'm going to pause and let you guys answer that, and then we'll have Hannah ask the last question. Do anyone want to take that on?
I will jump into that.
Sure.
It is something that I grapple with. My city manager is here today, and we have this conversation all the time, because you are exactly right. The historic way of government developing policy, okay, we're going to go listen, we're going to go ask, take, and then what manifests out of that? Do we close the loop? We have a very small example. Once we have had meetings, and I already gave the example about the lighting, but how do we close the loop and say, this is what we heard and this is what we're going to do? So when I think about extraction, the onus is on us as a government is to coordinate with all the other extraction. I hate that word, but it is actually so appropriate, because that's how it starts to feel. And so the good news is that in California, in San Rafael, a lot of agencies are centering equity for the first time. The bad news is we have 16,000 people that live in this one neighborhood, and it's the same. They're being asked about transit and schools and digital, all fantastic topics. So the onus is on us. It's on me to figure out, how do we get together, one, to ask the questions at the same time, and if it isn't a forum, how do we compensate people for their time? And it can be both the space, childcare, food, all that other good stuff to bring people there. And it can be stipends. And the other part about that is, how do we meet people where they are, right? It's hard to get a council meeting. I mean, Monday night at 6 p.m., I don't know what you're doing, but it might not be, I want to get in my car and drive down to a council meeting. But hey, I'm happy to go to the soccer field. We have fantastic soccer players and fields in San Rafael, and go and have those conversations there, so it's less extractive. And I'll just close by saying we need to be creative. And I think that's, as designers, that you can help us with that. How can we continue to be creative? Because these are real problems. I gave 2 solutions there, but I'm sure that there are many more out there, and I can't wait to hear them.
Great, and you'll get to continue this conversation at the table discussion. Hannah, you will have the last question for our panel.
Thank you, Tony. I think, you know, going back to this idea of reframing, one of the ways that we've began to reframe the idea of disability is that instead of an impairment of the body. It's a mismatch between the person's body and the environment. So it's not necessarily the body that's flawed, but instead the environment. And Mayor Sciaretta brought up a really, a really great example of, you know, being able to advocate for situations where a person is able to kind of use autonomy in order to get around and like walk independently. But I also wonder, because the mismatch between the environment and often people's bodies is so large, it's not just on the scale of the crosswalk, but it's on the scale of, you know, the transportation and the signage and, you know, the way and the entrances to buildings. And that prevents people from, particularly disabled people, from entering public life and entering public realm, which reduces our ability to advocate for change. And so I'm curious, how do you kind of overcome all of those kind of barriers that exist while, you know, kind of maintaining this ability to push forward and make, you know, these small changes?
I think the answer is really kind of in your question, the small changes, and you do them, you know, one at a time. And you want to do more. But the reality is sometimes it is just one at a time. And just to kind of give a parallel example, I was having a conversation with some of the mayors earlier, and we're all, you know, in this space where we're trying to change these systems that have been around for hundreds of years, right? And I'm going to go biblical a little bit, but there's a Bible quote that talks about one waters, one plants, but God will bring the increase. And so sometimes, you know, the little thing you do might not be the thing that creates the change, the big change that you thought was going to happen, but you've at least put the pebble in the river to begin to do the rippling effect. I think the other thing is when we think about making our spaces accessible to everyone, open to everyone, is think about not just, you know, the physical disabilities, but also other disabilities, those that people can't see, and just understanding as we design, you really want to hear from everyone so that you can design for everyone. And sometimes hearing from everyone, and I'm going to be done in just a minute, it's not, we talked about kind of to your question about the extraction economy, and you go out with your survey and you're asking this question. Sometimes you can ask a question just by getting out of the neighborhood and observing. And so, real world example, you know, in our community, you know, we had a curb cut for a park, right? Well, that's not where people were walking to get to the park. We saw where people were walking to get to the park because that's where the grass was not growing, right? Yeah. And so sometimes it's not about going out with your survey and asking questions, it's about observing what's happening in your community.
That's a fantastic answer, because now I can promote Hannah a little bit, because she had a fantastic Option Studio installation last fall that that created this amazing physical experience of the tension that she was just talking about between the body and the environment. It really was quite impactful. So great question to end with. Let's thank our first panel of mayors and moderators. And we can invite them to leave the stage. And as I step down and introduce the next panel, which will require some actual stage reorientation. Great. Our second panel will feature 3 mayors and 3 student organizations. So I'd love to invite the mayor of Allentown, Pennsylvania. Sorry, I've been talking for 3 days straight. Mayor Matt Tuerk. The mayor of McMinnville, Oregon, and if you were at our reception, mayor and winemaker, Mayor Remy Drapkin, and the mayor of Racine, Wisconsin, Frank Lloyd Wright, Johnson Wax, Mayor Corey Mason. If you guys could come to the stage and sit in the middle 3 seats. You are going to be joined by Rob Brenner, representing the Harvard Urban Planning Organization, Jaime Espinosa from Harvard GSD Real Estate Club, and Donald Olorontobo, representing the National Organization of Minority Architecture Students. Let's give them a round of applause. All righty. So in this panel, since Rob is sitting next to me, hey Rob, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and your organization and go ahead and launch the first question.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tony.
You're welcome.
So my name is Rob Benner. I am a second-year urban planning student. I'm from just down the street in Newton, Massachusetts, and I am here representing the Harvard Urban Planning Organization. The Harvard Urban Planning Organization, or HUPO, is the primary kind of programming and advocacy association for planners at GSD. So we host a lot of events focused on how planners can get to know each other, how planners can get to know the city of Boston, and how planners can network and get to know alums. And then we also think through advocacy issues in the built environment, both locally and increasingly globally as well. And so the first question that I'd love to ask folks is really just to dive a little bit about transportation. So recent trends in transportation coming out of the pandemic point to a really huge issue that we're seeing where Americans are driving a lot more and taking transit less. And we see this through transit budget cuts to increased road deaths on our streets to multi-lane drive-throughs as companies like Chipotle and Chick-fil-A shift their business models towards a primarily drive-through model. And so as these we're thinking about making our cities kind of greener, safer, and more people-oriented spaces. How do you, as mayors, balance this against this really kind of clear and growing preferences that a lot of Americans are having for their cars?
So anybody would like to take that question on? Mayor Tapp?
I can start. It is a tricky balance, and I'm speaking as somebody who rides my bicycle to work and walks to work and is really an advocate for those, I guess, more people-centered roadways. And we lean on our colleagues and on our allies and on our neighbors and on our partners and sometimes on the federal government for help with that as well. We're at the City of Allentown engaged in developing a Safe Streets Action Plan with support from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and that can do some of the planning work. And as we've seen in the work that we just went through with the Just City Fellowship, a lot of that is engaging with our residents to help them understand what safe streets and what safe roads mean to them. And we try to make sure that it truly is safe roads for all, and ensuring that it's safe roads for all road users. And I think that if we can build streets that are and roads in our cities that are safer for all road users, that redounds to the benefit of our pedestrians as well. So understanding that, and it's hard for me to say as somebody who's worn a T-shirt that said "ride bikes and throw bricks" in my past, to kind of make a movement toward creating safer places for drivers as well. But I think that we do have to all work together in our urban environments to promote road safety for everyone. So the answer to the question of finding that balance is as it's probably going to be the case in most of these answers, is ask the people.
Would anybody else like to take that question? Mayor?
Sure. So, I don't think the love affair that America has with cars is that new, right? I think we're just sort of seeing it reemerge. In Racine, we run transit for the region, and believe it or not, just by being strategic about, for example, we have a technical college in town, and we made an agreement with them that all of their students through fees would have bus passes. And so we've actually seen an increase in ridership post-pandemic than before. But it's also just, I think what Mayor Tuerk was just saying is true about making sure you've got safe spaces for everybody. I certainly think the Justice 40 initiative coming out of the federal government that asks you to think differently about where transportation resources go and looking at them through an equity lens has been a real game changer, even in our own engineering division, about how people have to think about things has been helpful. And it's also just thinking through whether or not that's true for everybody or not. We had a town hall meeting for paratransit, and there was one rider there who said, every time you cut one of these routes, my world gets smaller. And I've really never forgotten that. And I think we have to think about, for whom are we building out these systems or not building out these systems? And I really try to think about it as how do we expand the number of people who want to use transit. For a lot of people, it's the option of last resort. And I think we've got to figure out how to make it a broader service that's used by more and more people, and trying to think outside the box about how to do that. It's not easy, but I think that's how we have to think about it.
Right.
I could add just a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. I think that a lot of this is tied up in how you address your values in your planning. So remember that your question is based on an American preference for driving, but really that is the nature of the question itself comes with so much privilege because it assumes that somebody can afford a car. And so if we center equity in how we're planning our cities and how we're addressing even our transportation systems, well, we can think about how we need to invest in mass transit, right, to create more options, invest in active transportation systems so it makes bike lanes or shared lanes or walkability more accessible. But the other thing that we need to think about when you're talking about globally is how are we forming our neighborhoods so that we can naturally be less dependent on cars? Can you walk to the grocery store or do you have to take transportation to get there? And I think that if the cultural shift comes from thinking about how we design our city as a whole and creating access from your home to all of your needs, that helps us start reforming how we're thinking about transportation.
Let's move from infrastructures of mobility to places where we live and talk about housing for a second. So I'm going to turn it over to Jaime to ask his first question, first telling us about yourself and the real estate club.
Great. So my name is Jaime Espinosa. I'm an urban planner from Los Angeles, California. I'm currently enrolled in the Master in Real Estate program. And I'm particularly interested in merging urban planning, real estate, and emerging technologies to shape the future of our cities. I'm here representing the GSD Real Estate Club. The Real Estate Club is a community for students to explore their interests in all facets of real estate, including finance, technology, construction, development, and housing policy. So my question is related to affordable housing. So many cities across the country are grappling with affordable housing issues. To gain a greater picture as to how local leaders are addressing these issues, what specific initiatives have, your respective administrations undertaken to address the limited supply of affordable housing in your communities? And can you provide any specific examples of how new affordable housing projects have positively impacted the local economy and community development of the areas that you're from?
Anybody like to take it? Yeah, Mayor Remy. I think you're going to be on all the time, so.
Okay.
Just
okay.
Go for it.
So there's something you probably have heard of called inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning, kind of like the term affordability. I heard this in this class. Affordability has been weaponized, and that's true. And really, shouldn't the mindset be that individuals should be able to afford their housing, whatever level of housing that is, and I think the answer to that is yes. So, but inclusionary zoning or regulating the amount of housing that has to hit within a certain price point is completely within the realm and the work of government. And we just have to start demanding that. But the other thing that we can do is change what types of housing we allow to be built. And so a lot of our histories are designed specifically to create systems of exclusion and to create, a very white-centered neighborhoods as the priority for the city throughout America. And so, I lost my train of thought, but so when we start thinking about our different types of allowances, a very small thing we did in McMinnville, but it was something we found in our code. Duplexes could only be built in certain areas and on corners, right? So over the history of time, imagine all that multifamily housing that did not get dispersed throughout neighborhoods, and therefore you're creating low-income neighborhoods. So I would really lean into inclusionary zoning, figure out how you're going to repackage it. We just repackaged inclusionary zoning, essentially. I just realized this is being broadcast, but we did just successfully worked with our state representative to get a bill through. And then the effect of that is, for us, we're getting an infrastructure investment from the state that's going to allow this entire, not just neighborhood, but really a region within our city to provide housing. They'll have to hit certain criteria for some of the housing in terms of affordability, but also that has been stagnant since 2007. So when all of a sudden 290 lots are being developed to whatever density it is, I mean, that is job creation.
Would one of our other mayors like to take that?
So first of all, I would just say it's really exciting to have people from real estate as part of these conversations. I'll just say when I became mayor and what I've told to people when they become mayor is you should take a real estate finance class quickly because people are going to come into your office and ask you for a lot of resources for a lot of things, to do things. And I think as people think about running for mayor or want to become mayor, conceptualizing how they want to see the built environment change or what sort of design they'd aspire to do, I think a lot of us at least have ideas about that, but nobody really tells you, hey, this is how you're going to have to make the real estate and the value of it drive these outcomes you want to do. So it's exciting to have real estate studies as part of the conversation. For us, the affordable housing is something that we've actually been doing quite a bit of for about 40 years. We are also a community that has the highest unemployment in the state, some of the lowest wages in the state, and some of the biggest challenges in terms of how poverty is being densified because we're the one community in the county that does affordable housing and the rest of them don't. So for us, affordability hasn't been the obstacle for people to be able to get to where they need to go. It's been other challenges. So we've been really trying to focus on replacing some of the legacy affordable housing that's been there, particularly in the single family space with lead paint and lead pipes and other challenges. And then also trying to really focus on home ownership as part of a way to grow wealth within minority communities. So for us, we have other deficiencies. We found affordability by itself doesn't necessarily take down all the barriers that we need to move people into the middle class. But it's still an important thing that we need to think about as we build new housing units. You still want to build some affordability into it and do everything that you can to try to lift people up in your community to be able to take advantage of it. But it's been an interesting mix that affordability by itself hasn't rebuilt a robust middle class, at least not in Racine.
Right. So I'm gonna ask Donald to pull in actually your third question, which is about neighborhood change and gentrification, into this conversation. Because you talk about transit and mobility and investments, and so investments in infrastructure in a neighborhood, and questions about affordable housing come with the assumption that either the house I'm in I can no longer afford because of wages or changes in a neighborhood that are increasing prices and costs, right? And I know, Donald, one of your questions is about this trend of gentrification. So I want to pull you into this conversation at this point. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization, and why don't you ask the next question?
Thank you. My name is Donald Olarintoba. I'm a Nigerian American. This is my first year at the GSD. I'm in the architecture program. The organization I'm representing is the National Organization of Minority Architects, the Student Association here at the GSD. We kind of focus on forming community for students here, providing them platform to use their voice, and then also connecting them to wonderful people like you guys to kind of form future connections for their own futures. My question on gentrification I wanted to ask about was, as a mayor, how do you personally navigate the complex terrain of neighborhood improvement and gentrification concerns? Could you share some strategies that you found effective in this context, and perhaps provide an example of a project in your city that you found successful and balance the development with community needs at the same time?
Yeah. So Mayor Tuerk, you want to start with that one, and you can link any of the other.
I do, and this is such a. I want to focus on one specific word in your question, which is personally. I think that's part of how you address these challenges is you make sure that you're personally part of the conversation around what gentrification means in your community. In a place like Allentown, which it's a growing place. We're the third largest city in Pennsylvania. We've continued to grow while other cities in the Commonwealth have shrank. I know it's a surprise, right? Nobody knows that. We're a majority Latino city, and whereas 50 years ago we were 98.2% white, we've changed radically over 50 years, and in part that change has been. I think we've changed, become a more diverse environment, and gentrification in a place like Allentown is not the same conversation that you'd be having in a place like Brooklyn or in some of these larger cities. So what we try to do, or what the strategies that I've tried to bring to the task of navigating gentrification is to have open and honest dialogue with residents about how our community is changing. And I was really appreciated the way that Mayor Smith referred to the legacy residents in her comments. A lot of our conversation in Allentown is helping the existing community, or the community that was really present 50 years ago, get used to the new world and understand that it's not a question of replacement by any stretch of the imagination, that as our city grows, there are ways for us to accommodate new residents, new people who want to come to the city of Allentown and do what cities do, which is, in my belief, transform people's lives. So creating space for that to occur is a more, it's kind of a bigger conversation, I think, than simple gentrification. And I guess what I'd finish by saying is I'd ask people to really think about what they mean when they use that word gentrification, and start the conversations with a level setting around what does it mean to you.
And as I invite any other mayor to respond to that, would be curious to actually understand how it is you and or your community are defining gentrification. Anyone else want to answer that question? Mayor Corey?
So sometimes I have conversations with the mayor of Madison, Wisconsin, and Madison's our fastest growing affluent community in the state of Wisconsin. It's got the university, it's got Epic Systems, a lot of IT work, it's got the state capital at it. And so, you know, their city has grown literally the size of my city in the last 10 years, right? And so the challenge for them is, you know, the market in real estate is doing fantastic, and it's maybe too hot. They're seeing double-digit inflation in rents every year. So for her challenge is, how do I carve out enough space so that there's affordable housing so that working class people can still live in that city, right? And I think sometimes when we talk about gentrification, I don't know if this is what you meant by it, but sometimes when people talk about gentrification, I think they sort of assume that that's the condition everywhere, right? And so for a community like mine that's seen a lot of disinvestment, right? We were 95,000 people, now we're 78,000 people. We've seen a lot of industry leave and disinvestment. The question has to be posed differently. But I think, and what I've heard in the last few days here in other conversations, I think sometimes the gentrification question is maybe asking, how do we make sure we're not leaving people behind, right? And if that's what it means, in a context of a city like mine, it means different things than just affordable housing. It means helping find ways for people to move up and still succeed. And so it's a big question, it's an important question, but one of the things I try to convey as sort of a smaller Midwestern city that isn't growing with double-digit inflation, that are challenges to making sure that everyone gets included and that people can move up and be part of the American middle class are just different than they are in other places, like, you know, someplace in California or Madison or some of the more affluent growing cities in America. So it's a distinction that I think is important to make, because I think everybody's worried about the same thing when they bring it up, but on the ground, I think it means different things.
I think that's such an important point. I have taught a class here called the Gentrification Debates, which was a class inspired by students asking, and probably more specifically, presuming that all gentrification was bad, and they had a particular point of view of who the actor was, the instigator of it was. And so the class called a debate was to really unpack what that trend was, who was involved, who wasn't, does it change over time, does it change over context? And I think another important lesson, which is something you said, Mayor Mason, which is it is not just about housing or affordable housing. There are a number of different factors, everything from a city's taxing structure and its sources of revenue to how you help people move from lower class to middle class, which means you want them to do better and not always need a lower form of housing. You want them to move to the middle class and be successful and live the American dream or whatever dream you have in your country. And so there's a complexity to the trend that I think the class that I set up was aiming to help students unpack, so as you go out into the world, you understand the nuances and all the different levers that can be pulled. I want to move to another theme that cut across the questions that this particular group of student clubs have. So these questions have been about really policy in a way. There are a number of questions about, like, well, how do you get it done? And so I'm going to come back to Rob, because he's posed this really interesting question around deal-making cities versus plan-making cities. And the next series of questions I think I would like aimed at how do you as mayors, like what does the governor of your city, what are the ways in which you have to shape your power, manage your power, distribute your power to actually get things moving forward? So Rob, why don't you take the next round of questions?
Perfect, yeah. So yeah, we have a planning professor here who has talked about this, as Tony's mentioned, this idea of a deal-making versus plan-making city. And these are overly simplified ideas, but the basic sense is that a deal-making city is going to focus on crafting development opportunities for, housing, for entertainment, for, any other kind of tax revenue purposes that can be used for, any other funding, any other projects. While a plan-making city is really focused on crafting that hard vision for their future that development has to align to, regardless of some of those financial benefits. And again, the reality is obviously much, much, much more complex as mayors, and you have to act as both in order to build new projects. But I'm curious, how have you navigated this tension in your time as mayors? How have you weighed the financial impact of a project against a vision for your city?
We've been talking about that for like 10 weeks.
It's such a great question. I mean, the reality is you're doing both, right? I mean, so you get in, you've got to establish tax base. We didn't have much new construction in Racine when I became mayor. We've done more in the last 5 years than we've done in the previous 25 years. Really important stuff to get a market reestablished in our community. At the same time, though, this tension to not do the planning, right? Even for my own, I'm like, hey, how are we factoring in sustainability into these new buildings? Hey, how are we thinking about how we can actually do sustainability even in low-income housing so that those lower-income residents don't have a utility bill anymore, and they can invest that money into a mortgage and build community wealth or family wealth instead of paying a utility bill. Oftentimes what you get from your own staff or team is like, Mayor, do we have to do the extra things? It's so much easier. Could we just do the deal making and get the next thing done and move on to the next thing? So it really takes having some vision and really insisting that your values have to reinforce the kind of design and redevelopment that you want to do in your community. And frankly, coming to events like this and meeting people like you all who want to lift those values up, whether it's about access or sustainability or the beauty of the design or what have you, it's really, really important. But it is the easiest thing in the world to just let it go for expediency's sake to get the next deal done. It's a great question, and it's a huge tension in the work that we do.
Yeah. Would anybody else like to take that on? One more response?
Just like two quick things. I think over the past 3 days here in Cambridge, there's been two themes that have really stuck out in our presentations and in our work, and it's been clarity and courage, right? And the vision side of that, the plan making, is being super clear in your vision and cutting through it all so that you can, whoever is working in your city understands where you're coming from. And sometimes the clarity means dispelling a lot of the previous kind of accumulated ideas about what your city should be. And so being clear in your mayoral vision is absolutely essential. But the other side of it then on the courage is just like to just get it done, right? And sometimes not let the lack of a good traffic study get in the way of just getting the project done, right? And mayors have a tremendous amount of power if we can tap into the courage that is required to get those things done. So those are things that we carry around with us all the time is clarity and courage.
So I can imagine Mayor Remy has a response to that, but I want Donald to pull in another question about your personal role and working with others as a part of that question of the deal making and the visioning. So Donald, you want to take your next question for us?
Yeah, totally. This kind of even continues some of the conversation from the prior panel.
Yeah, please.
Kind of talking about trust and kind of like your personal role in building trust in your diverse communities, and like how does your identity, whether it's your hometown or you identify with the people of the town, how does that affect how you introduce policy or what infrastructure you decide to protect or what you decide to include in new communities? In your vision, in your deal making, in your policy. Mayor Remy? It should stay on. Stop flicking it.
Okay. Stop turning it off. Did I do it? Okay. Yeah, so I think that, trust building, trust happens over time. And so that may seem obvious, but that trust building happens over time in a couple, in multiple different ways. So first, you kind of need to look at all the time that's come before you, when you showed up on the scene, and what trust building has happened historically. And then how can you lean into that, or how can you acknowledge it? When I started with the city really had no relationship with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, who are neighbors, and also are residents of our city. And I didn't start this by saying, well, I need to establish a relationship with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde so that I can have an economic benefit for my city. I knew these were my neighbors and that I was disconnected and didn't have the insight. But before I even started there, I had to really understand the larger context, the history of failed treaties between the United States government and tribal communities and sovereign nations, and how what government has done over and over again is make promises and not fulfill them. And so if I'm stepping into this role and want you to believe that I am going to act differently, I have to invest the time to demonstrate that. And so I have to account for the historical time, and then I have to personally take my time and invest that now, and that means showing up, and that means listening. And so I think that we have expanded our relationships tremendously with so many organizations, and it's because I have approached it with curiosity, I've approached it with respect, and I've also approached it with I have tried to educate myself, so I'm not asking you to educate me. And then that also means that when the time is right, I have a friend that I can say, I have to ask you this question, and this is it's a hard question for me, but I have to admit I don't know this. I don't know how to source this information, and you do that over and over again, and you're developing real relationships between people.
Yeah. And let me allow Jaime to ask the last question. And I'm going to suggest it's a question about the collaboration and partnership, only because this idea why trust is important in the conversation, I'm really glad we had a question about that, is because the government doesn't do the work of changing cities alone. So this question about trust with communities, and we talked a lot about that in the last panel, how you negotiate vision and implementation collaboratively with citizenry. And I know Jaime has a question about and I want to tie trust to that, which is how do you build partnerships to get some of this work done? So Jaime, any way in which you want to fashion a question around that, please feel free to do so.
Right, so striking a balance in city government, as you all know, I think is really crucial and very complex. So my question is, how do you establish these partnerships across the community with the private sector, community stakeholders, for example, in the planning and implementation of various different city initiatives to be able to balance the priorities of the city, including infrastructure, education, public safety, and so on?
And I think we can allow each of you to offer a brief response to that before we...
I'll go quickly.
Yes,
it was one thing, unfortunately, Mayor Hammoud is not with us today. He left a little earlier, but he and I were speaking last night about, I'd add one to your list, which is health. And fundamentally, serving the public health is at the core of all of these things, right? So when you build housing, that is a statement about serving the public health. When you build transportation infrastructure, it's a statement about serving the public health. And as you as a mayor are very, again, to go back to that clarity of your vision, if you're very vocal and clear about what your priorities are, it signals to the partners, right? It lets people know exactly how they can partner with you. And I'm on the same page as Mayor Hammoud on that, where if we just keep talking about how we create safe, clean, and healthy environments that promote people's well-being, keeping that at the center tells the partners exactly what the stakes are when they start working with us.
Anybody else want to take that on?
So I think there's a couple things that I would say about it quickly. Part of it is I just think as you as mayors, we make lots of appointments to boards, committees, and commissions, and if those boards, committees, and commissions don't reflect the diversity of the community you serve, and those are the rooms where the decisions are being made, it's very hard then at the back end to have trust. So one of the things I was pleased to do when I became mayor was really begin to make appointments to boards, committees, and commissions that actually reflected the community instead of what was there before. The other thing in all the, it was a big project we worked on. We did 9 months of community engagement around it, right? And it would have been easy to just sort of say, here's the design, we're going to do it next week. We talked to the consultants, we know what's best for the community. We really, to win people over on the plan, needed to see their input and be able to show them, you said you wanted this, we changed the plan this way, and making sure that you're actually getting a broad representation from across the community of people engaging in it and making sure that your surveys are actually representative samples of the community. Those are all things that are really important to do. One pastor said to me, though, I remember in one of these meetings, and I don't know if he came up with this quote or he just used it, but he said, look, change moves at the speed of trust. And you just got to remember that these changes you want to make, you've got to build the trust in the community to bring people along.
And any last comment? Would you like to respond? Okay, great. So, well, I'll add one last thing to that because it ties together trust, courage, and clarity. I think the other component of the response to that question, Jaime, particularly from the space of government, which is to present the clarity of the vision and intention of what your community has, especially when it relates to dealing with the private market, the private sector, private developers, right, who are sort of risk adverse, as you well know, right? And so to the extent that the leaders of the city, together with their community, can present clear vision, clear opportunity. As a developer, I'm going to feel more confident to go into a situation when the community has told me what they want. And that aligns with what I know how to do, right? And that's going to facilitate a better public-private partnership because, you've invited me in and you've kind of given me this signal that, hey, you're looking for what I do, I could be a good partner for you. So vision really is important to helping to facilitate the public-private partnership that gets to the swifter execution of the deal. So I've tied all three of those together. So let's give this panel a round of applause. Thank you so very much. So in our final 35 or 40 minutes or so, we invite the mayors and students to go back to a small table. If you're sitting in the audience and want to participate in a dialogue of questions and answers with the mayors and their amazing staff of economic development specialists, planners, public space and public park directors, chiefs of staff, we invite you to enter into the Q&A through direct and intimate conversation with our guests. Thank you all so very much.